My favorite sound was the shattering of crystal against marble. Only then, in the gilded cage of my life, would all eyes turn to me. The sound of shattering crystal was my favorite kind of silence. It was the only time the cavernous halls of our mansion ever truly went quiet. The frantic footsteps of the staff would halt. My father's endless phone calls would pause mid-sentence, and for a glorious, shimmering moment, all the attention in this gilded cage was on me. The latest casualty was a Lalique vase, a particularly gaudy thing shaped like a swan that my father had bought at some auction in Geneva. It made a satisfyingly loud explosion against the marble floor. I didn't even flinch as a shard skidded past my velvet slipper. It was a Tuesday. Mrs. Davison, the head housekeeper who had the unfortunate disposition of a startled rabbit, scurried into the foyer, her hands fluttering at her chest. "Miss Ilara, are you all right?" I leaned against the grand staircase, inspecting my nails with a practiced air of boredom. "Perfectly. The vase, however, has had a rather tragic accident." Her eyes, wide and watery, flickered from my face to the glittering debris. This one, a maid named Chloe, had only lasted 3 weeks. A new record, even for me. She was currently sobbing in the staff kitchen, her tenure terminated by the simple act of bringing me chamomile tea when I had explicitly requested Earl Grey. The vase was just collateral damage, an exclamation point on my dissatisfaction. My father appeared at the top of the stairs a few minutes later, not a hair out of place in his tailored suit, his phone still pressed to his ear. He muted the call, his jaw tight. "Ilara, what is the meaning of this?" "The swan flew into the wall," I said sweetly. "Tragic, really. I think it was lovesick." He pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture that was supposed to signal the end of his patience, but I knew it was just theater. His patience was a bottomless, empty well. He didn't have the time for genuine anger. "That was a $250,000 vase. And you'll buy another one for $500,000 tomorrow," I countered, my voice flat. "It doesn't matter, Father. None of it does." He sighed. That long-suffering sound that was meant to make me feel guilty. It didn't work. Guilt requires a conscience, and I was pretty sure mine had atrophied from disuse. "We'll discuss your attitude later. Mrs. Davison, clean this up, and hire a new personal maid for Ilara. Someone resilient." With that, he unmuted his phone and walked back into his study, the heavy oak door closing with a final, dismissive click. Business was calling. It always was. That's how my life worked. I was a problem to be managed, a line item on his budget of annoyances. I break something, he buys something new. I fire someone, he hires a replacement. He never asked why. He never looked past the storm to see the shipwreck at its center. He just kept reinforcing the walls of my prison with gold leaf and fresh staff. 2 days later, the new maid arrived. I was in my room, what I like to call the fortress of solitude, when Mrs. Davison knocked timidly. "Miss Ilara, this is Maria, your new personal maid." I didn't look up from my book. "How long do you think you'll last?" I asked the closed door. The door opened. The woman who stepped inside was not what I expected. The others had been young, nervous girls who jumped at their own shadows, or stern, older women who tried to discipline me with pursed lips. This woman, Maria, was still. She was maybe in her 40s, with warm olive skin and dark hair pulled back in a simple, neat bun. But it was her eyes that caught me off guard. They were a deep, dark brown, and they weren't scared or judgmental. They were just watching, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. "As long as I'm needed, miss," she said. Her voice was calm, with a faint, unplaceable accent. There was no tremor of fear, no hint of false deference. I finally closed my book with a snap. "And you think you're needed?" I gave her a slow, deliberate once-over, from her sensible black shoes to her simple gray uniform. "My father hired you. He thinks a new servant is the solution to everything. Let me save you the trouble. It isn't." She just gave a small nod. "I'm here to help in any way I can." She glanced around my room. It was a calculated disaster zone. Designer clothes were heaped on a chaise lounge, half-eaten room service trays sat on the antique desk, and books were piled on the floor. It was my territory, marked with the chaos I felt inside. Most new maids would gasp or immediately start clucking their tongues and tidying. Maria did neither. Her gaze lingered on the mess for a moment before landing on a small, silver frame on my bedside table, mostly obscured by a stack of magazines. "May I begin with the dusting?" she asked, her tone even. "Do whatever you want," I scoffed, turning my back on her and picking up my book again. "You're the hired help." I expected to hear the clatter of plates, the rustle of clothes. Instead, there was only quiet. For a full 5 minutes, the only sound was the turning of my own pages. I couldn't stand it. I twisted around to see what she was doing. She was standing by my desk, not cleaning, but looking at a piece of paper she'd picked up from the floor. It was an old childish drawing I'd done years ago, of a smiling stick figure with bright yellow hair holding hands with a smaller stick figure under a lopsided sun. My mother, before she got sick. Before she was just a ghost who haunted the hallways of this house and the corners of my father's memory. A hot, ferocious rage surged through me. It was an invasion, a violation. That drawing was the one thing in this room that wasn't for show, that wasn't part of the performance. It was mine. "Put that down," I snarled, my voice low and dangerous. Maria didn't startle. She turned to face me, the drawing still held delicately in her hands, her expression unreadable. "She has a beautiful smile," she said softly. I shot out of my chair, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "You have no right," I spat, snatching the drawing from her hand, crumpling it slightly in my fist. "You don't know anything about me. You're just another uniform, another ghost who will be gone in a week. Don't you dare touch my things." My chest was heaving, my eyes burning with tears I refused to let fall. I was waiting for her to cower, to apologize, to run to Mrs. Davison and quit on the spot. But she didn't move. She just looked at me, her gaze piercing, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. She took a small, steadying breath and said, in that same impossibly calm voice, "I see her in your eyes." The words hung in the air between us, heavier than the silence that followed the swan vase's demise. "I see her in your eyes." For a moment my fury sputtered out, replaced by a bewildering cold shock. All the insults I had ready, all the venom I was about to spit, dissolved on my tongue. No one had mentioned my mother to me in years. She was a portrait on the wall, a name on a hospital wing my father had funded. She was not a person you saw in someone else's eyes. "Get out," I finally whispered, my voice raw and unfamiliar to my own ears. Maria didn't move. She simply lowered her hands to her sides. "My apologies, miss. I did not mean to upset you." "I'm not upset," I snapped, the familiar anger rushing back in like a tide. It was a relief, a warm blanket of rage. "I'm telling you to get out of my room. Now." I pointed a trembling finger at the door. She gave a slight respectful bow of her head. "As you wish." She turned and walked out, closing the door so softly behind her it was like she had never been there at all. I was left standing in the middle of my chaotic room, the crumpled drawing of my mother clutched in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had won. I had made her leave. So why did it feel so much like I had lost? That encounter set the tone for the week that followed. I made it my singular mission to break Maria. I was an artist of cruelty, and she was my new stubborn canvas. I accidentally tipped a full glass of blackberry juice onto a priceless antique Aubusson rug. Maria spent 4 hours on her hands and knees with a special concoction of club soda and salt, humming a quiet folk song as she worked, and by the time she was done, you'd never known it had happened. I demanded she rearrange my entire walk-in closet by color, then by season, then by designer, changing my mind every few hours. She did it without a single complaint, her movements efficient and graceful. I insulted her clothes, her accent, her very presence. She would just meet my gaze with those unnervingly steady eyes and say, "Is there anything else you require, Miss Alara?" It was infuriating. She was a fortress, and all my cannons were firing duds. Worse, she started to anticipate me. The morning after a particularly nasty screaming match, I woke up with a pounding migraine, the kind that made light feel like tiny daggers in my eyes. Before I could even ring for aspirin, The door opened a crack. Maria slipped in with a tray. On it was not the usual toast and tea, but a glass of water, 2 pills, and a small bowl of sliced frozen grapes. She placed a cool, lavender-scented cloth on my forehead without a word, drew the blackout curtains fully closed, and left as silently as she came. The frozen grapes were exactly what I needed, their cold sweetness a balm to my throbbing head. How could she have known? It was a trick my mother used to do. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This woman, this stranger, was showing me a quiet, persistent kindness that I hadn't felt since I was a little girl. And it terrified me. Kindness was a weapon. It was a way to get you to lower your guard, to make you soft, to make you need someone, and needing someone was the surest path to getting hurt. My father had taught me that. I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her make me feel anything. I had to prove that her kindness was a lie, an act. I had to show my father, and more importantly, myself, that she was just like everyone else, replaceable and untrustworthy. I knew exactly how to do it. On my mother's vanity, a piece of furniture I never allowed anyone to touch, sat a small silver filigree music box. It was the last gift she had ever given me. When you opened it, a tiny ballerina spun to a tinkling, delicate melody. It was my most sacred possession. That afternoon, while Maria was turning down my bed, I waited for her back to be turned. My hands shaking, I crept over to the vanity, picked up the music box and tucked it deep inside the pocket of a winter coat hanging in the back of my closet. I returned to my chair, my heart a frantic bird in my chest, and took a deep, shuddering breath. I waited for her to finish. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Miss Elara?" she asked, her work complete. "Everything is perfect, Maria," I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. As soon as the door clicked shut, I began my performance. I let out a scream, a raw, piercing shriek of pure panic that I knew would carry through the entire wing. I threw a lamp against the wall, for good measure. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Mrs. Davison burst in first, her face pale with alarm, followed moments later by my father, who actually looked up from his phone for once. "Elara, what on earth is wrong?" he demanded. I pointed a shaking finger toward the vanity, my eyes wide with manufactured terror and tears I'd summoned from years of practice. "It's gone," I wailed, my voice cracking perfectly. "It's gone. My mother's music box. It was right there, and now it's gone." My father's eyes scanned the empty spot on the vanity, and his face hardened. "Mrs. Davison, who has been in this room today?" The head housekeeper wrung her hands. "Only Maria, sir. She was just in here for the evening turn-down." Right on cue, drawn by the commotion, Maria appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right, miss?" All the air seemed to get sucked out of the room. My father's gaze, cold and hard as steel, fell upon her. I held my breath, the final checkmating move ready on my lips. I let a single, perfect tear roll down my cheek. "She was the only one here," I whispered, my voice a broken accusation. "The only one." My father's expression was glacial. He didn't waste time with questions. He was a man of action, of swift and merciless judgment. He took a step toward Maria, his voice a low growl that vibrated with authority. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Maria's face was a mask of confusion, but not fear. Her dark eyes darted from my tear-streaked face to the empty spot on the vanity, then to my father's accusing stare. There was a beat of silence where I expected her to crumble, to protest her innocence with frantic denials like the maids before her. Instead, she straightened her back slightly. "I did not take anything, sir," she said, her voice as calm and steady as ever. It was infuriatingly composed. I needed her to break. "It's gone," I cried, turning up the theatrics. "She was standing right there. She must have taken it when I wasn't looking." I buried my face in my hands, my shoulders shaking with feigned sobs. From between my fingers, I watched. "We can search her room," Mrs. Davison offered meekly, her eyes darting nervously between my father and Maria. "And her belongings?" My father nodded curtly. "Do it. And you," he said, pointing a finger at Maria, "you will stay right here until this is sorted out." The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Maria's gaze met mine over my father's shoulder. There was no anger in her eyes, no panic. There was just a profound, unsettling sadness. It was as if she wasn't looking at an accuser, but at a wounded animal lashing out. The look unnerved me more than any outburst would have. It made a small crack in the icy wall around my heart. For a fleeting second, a wave of guilt, hot and sharp, washed over me. I pushed it down, doubling down on my lie. This was the only way. Mrs. Davison returned 20 minutes later, her face grim. "We've searched her room, sir. Her bag. There's nothing." I felt a surge of triumph. Of course there wasn't. It was safely tucked away in my own closet. This was even better. Now she looked guilty, but had been clever enough to hide it. My father turned back to Maria, his patience worn thin. "This is a very valuable, very sentimental item. My daughter is distraught. This is your last chance. Tell me where it is, and perhaps I'll be lenient." "With all due respect, sir," Maria said, her hands clasped in front of her, "I cannot tell you where something is when I do not know." "Then you're fired," he snapped. "Pack your things. You'll be escorted from the premises immediately. Your final pay will be withheld to cover a fraction of the cost." This was it. Victory. I had won. I had proven she was just like the rest, disposable. I had protected myself from her creeping kindness. I waited for the relief, for the satisfaction. But all I felt was a hollow, aching emptiness. Maria didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply gave a small, dignified nod. "I understand, sir," she said. Then she did something I never expected. She looked directly at me, her eyes cutting through my performance, past my father, and straight into the miserable, lonely girl orchestrating the whole charade. "Miss Alara," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I hope you find what you're looking for." And with that she turned and walked out of my room, her posture perfect, her footsteps silent. She was gone. The days that followed were supposed to be a return to normalcy, to my controlled, quiet chaos. But they weren't. The mansion felt emptier than before. The silence wasn't powerful. It was just desolate. The new maid my father hired, a nervous girl named Sophie, was perfectly competent. She did exactly what I asked. She never spoke out of turn, and she trembled whenever I raised my voice. She was perfect, and I hated her. I found myself thinking about Maria at odd times, the way she hummed when she worked, the frozen grapes she'd brought for my migraine, the sad, knowing look in her eyes as she was dismissed. "I hope you find what you're looking for." What did that even mean? I had what I wanted. I had my solitude. I had my father's fleeting attention. I had proven that no one could get close. 2 weeks after Maria was fired, I was rummaging through my winter coats, looking for a pair of leather gloves. My fingers brushed against something hard and metallic in a pocket. The music box. I pulled it out, the silver filigree cool against my skin. I hadn't looked at it since I'd hidden it. My victory felt sour, like ash in my mouth. A wave of self-loathing so intense it made me dizzy, washed over me. I had framed an innocent woman, a woman who had shown me more genuine care in a week than my own father had in a year. I sank onto the floor of my closet, the music box clutched in my hand. What had I done? The silence of the house pressed in on me, and for the first time I felt the full weight of my own cruelty. It wasn't a shield, it was a cage, and I had just locked the final door myself. That evening I couldn't eat. I couldn't read. I just sat in my room, staring at the music box. The guilt was a living thing, clawing at my insides. I had to fix it. I didn't know how, but I had to. I marched down to my father's study, and for the first time in my life, knocked before entering. He was on a video call, a projection of a boardroom in Tokyo, shimmering in the air above his desk. He muted the call, his expression annoyed. "What is it, Alara? I'm busy." "It's about the music box," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I held it up. "Maria didn't steal it. I hid it. I lied." My father stared at the music box, then at my face. I braced myself for the explosion, for the shouting, for the disappointment. Instead, a look of profound weariness settled over his features. He sighed. That same old theatrical sigh. Well, that's a mess. Mrs. Davison, he called out, his voice raised. Find out where that maid, Maria, went. Send her a check for severance and an apology. And Elara, he said, turning his cold eyes on me, we'll discuss your lying later. Now, if you'll excuse me, this call is worth more than this entire house. He unmuted his call, and just like that, I was dismissed. A check. An apology sent by a third party. That was his solution. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. The gnawing guilt didn't subside. It intensified. I had to find her. I had to apologize myself, face to face. It took Mrs. Davison a day to track down an address from Maria's employment file. She gave it to me with a worried look. Miss Elara, I don't think it's a good idea for you to go there. It's not the kind of neighborhood you're used to. I didn't care. I called for a car, ignoring the driver's confused expression as I gave him the address. We left the manicured lawns and towering gates of my world behind, driving for nearly an hour until the scenery changed. The buildings became smaller, closer together, decorated with graffiti instead of ivy. The driver pulled up to a modest, slightly run-down apartment building. This is it, miss. My heart hammered in my chest as I got out of the car. I walked up the cracked concrete steps to the entrance. I found her apartment number, 3B, and stood before the peeling brown paint of her door. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely raise it to knock. I took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened. But it wasn't Maria who answered. It was a young girl, maybe 10 years old, with the same warm olive skin and the same deep, dark, steady eyes. She was holding a worn teddy bear, and she looked up at me with open curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked. I'm looking for Maria," I stammered. "Mom," the little girl called over her shoulder. "Someone's here for you." And then Maria appeared from the dim hallway behind her daughter. She was wearing a simple cotton dress, not her uniform, and her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She stopped dead when she saw me. Her face registered a flicker of surprise, then settled back into that unnervingly calm expression. "Miss Elara," she said, her voice even. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, a man's weak, rasping cough echoed from inside the apartment. The little girl's face clouded with worry. "Mom, Papa's coughing again." Maria put a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes never leaving mine. And in that moment, as I stood on her doorstep, looking from her to her worried child, to the unseen, sick man inside, I finally understood. Her kindness wasn't an act. Her calmness wasn't a defense. It was strength, a strength I couldn't possibly comprehend. And then I saw it, resting on a small end table just inside the door. A framed photograph. It was of Maria, the little girl, and a man who must be her husband, all smiling. And next to the photo was an identical silver filigree music box. My world tilted on its axis. The sight of that music box, my music box, but not mine at all, knocked the air from my lungs. It was identical in every way. The intricate silverwork, the tiny clasp, the elegant shape. All the pieces of the puzzle that was Maria clicked into place with a sickening finality. Her reaction to my drawing, her knowing sadness when I accused her, her parting words. It all made a terrible, gut-wrenching sense. "You," I stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the table. "You have one too." Maria's gaze followed mine. A soft, melancholic smile touched her lips. She gently guided her daughter further back into the apartment. "Lena, go see if your papa needs some water." The girl nodded and disappeared down the hall. Maria turned back to me, her expression open, vulnerable for the first time. "It was a gift from my mother. She gave it to me just before she passed away." The shame was a physical force, so powerful it buckled my knees. I had to grab the doorframe to steady myself. I had built an entire narrative of malicious intent around this woman, projected all my own pain and distrust onto her, all because of a coincidence. I hadn't just framed an innocent woman, I had desecrated the memory of her own mother with my selfish, childish tantrum. "I am so sorry," I whispered, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. "Maria, I lied. I hid my music box. I accused you because I don't know why. Because I'm a horrible person. Tears, real and hot this time, streamed down my face. The carefully constructed dam of my bitterness finally broke, and years of grief and loneliness came pouring out. My father, he sent a check, but that's not... I had to come. I had to tell you myself. What I did was unforgivable. She listened, her head tilted, her deep eyes holding my frantic, tearful gaze. She didn't interrupt. She didn't condemn me. When I was finished, my confession hanging in the air between us like a toxic cloud, she simply sighed. It wasn't a sigh of frustration like my father's, but one of deep, weary empathy. I knew, she said quietly. You knew, I choked out, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. How could you have known? I saw the way you looked at that drawing, Miss Alara. The way you guarded that vanity. It was not the anger of a spoiled child. It was the anger of a grieving one. Your pain is like a fortress you have built around yourself, and you were angry that I saw a crack in the wall. She took a small step closer. When you accused me, I looked in your eyes, and I did not see a thief. I saw a little girl who missed her mother. Her understanding was 1,000 times more devastating than any punishment my father could have devised. He saw a problem to be managed with money. She saw the pain behind the problem. Another cough, weaker this time, echoed from the back room. My husband, Hector, she explained, her voice softening. He has been sick for a long time. The medical bills, they are overwhelming. That is why I took the job at your house. The pay was very good. The final piece clicked into place, the reason she had endured my cruelty, the source of her unshakable calm. It wasn't for herself, it was for her family. For the sick man in the other room and the little girl with her mother's eyes. My $250,000 vase could have paid for his care for years. The thought made me feel sick. I can help, I said, the words tumbling out. My father, he has doctors, connections. We can pay for everything. Please, let me help. It was the first time in my life I had offered something that wasn't an insult or a demand. Maria looked at me, a long, searching look. Kindness is not a debt to be paid, Miss Alara. You do not have to do this to make up for what you did. I know, I insisted, my voice thick with sincerity. I want to. Not because I feel guilty, but because it's the right thing to do. Please, Maria, let me. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, and she wiped it away. She gave me a small, hesitant nod. That was the beginning. It wasn't a magical overnight transformation. It was a slow, difficult process. My father, to my surprise, agreed to help. When I explained the situation, the whole, ugly truth of it, he looked at me for a long moment, not as a line item, but as his daughter. For the first time, he put down his phone. He made the calls. The best specialists. The best hospitals. Hector was moved to a private facility that very week. I spent my time not at boutiques or salons, but at that hospital, and at Maria's apartment. I'd bring groceries or books for Lena. At first it was awkward. I didn't know how to act. I was clumsy with my attempts at kindness. But Maria was patient. She taught me how to make her husband's favorite soup. She taught me a few words in her native language. She showed me pictures of her family, telling me stories that made me laugh and cry. She never once mentioned the music box or my lie again. She simply opened a space for me in her life, a space filled with warmth and genuine connection. She showed me, through her quiet, steady actions, what unconditional love looked like. It wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about showing up. It was about seeing someone's pain and choosing to stay. Hector's health slowly began to improve. The light returned to Lena's eyes, and I began to change too. The anger inside me, the bitter, cold rage that had been my only companion for so long, started to melt away, replaced by something warmer, something lighter. One afternoon I was sitting with Maria in the hospital cafeteria. She put her hand over mine. "Your eyes are different now," she said softly. I looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "Before," she said, her thumb gently stroking my skin, "I saw your mother's smile in your eyes, hidden behind a great sadness. Now, I see your smile too. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I truly smiled. It wasn't a smirk or a sneer. It was real. The shattering crystal was no longer my favorite sound. The quiet hum of Maria's folk songs, the sound of Lena's laughter, the steady beep of a heart monitor signaling a life being saved, that was my new favorite kind of silence. I hadn't found what I was looking for by pushing people away. I found it when one remarkable woman refused to be pushed, and instead held up a mirror and showed me not the monster I had become, but the person I still had the chance to be.